Have you ever noticed that when the Bible presents the list of the tribes of Israel, the name of Joseph does not appear as a specific tribe? This draws attention because Joseph was one of the most remarkable characters in biblical history. He was the beloved son of Jacob with Rachel, the young man who had great dreams, was sold by his own brothers, endured humiliation as a slave and prisoner, and was later exalted as governor in Egypt. With such a powerful journey, why is there no tribe called Joseph? This detail is not there by accident. There is a deep reason, full of spiritual and historical meaning. While the other tribes received their territories under their own names, something different happened with Joseph, and this reveals something important about inheritance, purpose, and the work of God. In this video, you will discover why Joseph did not have a tribe bearing his name, what this decision represents within the divine plan, and how this detail changes the way we understand calling and promise. Before we begin, leave your like and share this video so that more people may be reached by this message. Joseph's story begins differently from that of the other sons of Jacob. He was not just another brother. Joseph was the son of Rachel, the wife Jacob loved most and for whom he worked many years. Because of this, from childhood, he received special affection from his father. Jacob did not hide this love, and everyone noticed. This favoritism stirred envy and resentment in his brothers, who began to look at Joseph with bitterness. Genesis 37 verses 3 and 4. While still young, Joseph began to have unusual dreams. They were not ordinary dreams, but revelations pointing to something great in the future. In one of them, sheaves bowed down before his sheaf. In another, the sun, the moon, and the stars bowed before him. When he shared these dreams, Joseph was not trying to exalt himself. He simply told what he had seen without fully understanding its meaning, but his brothers understood. They realized those dreams spoke of leadership and authority, and this increased even more the hatred they felt. Genesis 37, verses 5 and 11. From the beginning, it becomes clear that Joseph's life would not be ordinary. While his brothers were connected to work in the fields and to the immediate inheritance in Canaan, Joseph carried a different promise. His dreams indicated that his path would be distinct from that of the other sons of Jacob, who would later form the tribes of Israel. The situation worsens when Jacob sends Joseph to visit his brothers in the field. Far from their father's presence, resentment turns into action. They plot against him. They strip him of his robe, the symbol of Jacob's love, throw him into an empty cistern, and later sell him as a slave to merchants traveling to Egypt. Genesis 37, verses 18 and 28. At that moment, what seemed like promise turns into suffering. The young dreamer is now treated like an object, separated from his family, his land, and the future he imagined. Meanwhile, Joseph's brothers return to Canaan and continue their lives as usual. They remain in the land of promise, form their families, and follow the path that seemed natural for the sons of Jacob. Joseph, however, goes in another direction. He is taken away from his family and carried far from home. This separation, which appeared to be only injustice and suffering, was in fact part of something greater that God was orchestrating. In Egypt, Joseph's reality becomes difficult. The one who was once the beloved son now lives as a slave in a foreign land. He loses comfort, position, and everything that gave him security. Even so, God does not abandon him. The Bible makes it clear that the Lord was with Joseph, even far from home and in the midst of hardship. Genesis 39, verse 2. This is essential to understand his story. Being distant from his family did not mean being far from God. It was a time of preparation. While his brothers remained connected to the traditional inheritance, land, family, and territory, Joseph began to be shaped for something greater, something that went beyond the limits of a single tribe. The suffering he faced was not a mistake along the way, but the beginning of a purpose that extended far beyond receiving a portion of land in Israel. Over time, the situation begins to change. After years facing injustice, hard labor, and silence, Joseph is suddenly summoned to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, Genesis 41. It was not just another task. That moment would change the destiny of Egypt, and without him knowing it, would also transform the future of his own family. Standing before the most powerful man of that time, Joseph does not try to exalt himself. From the very beginning, he makes it clear that the ability to interpret dreams did not come from him, but from God. Genesis 41, verse 16. This detail reveals something important. Joseph knew the credit was not his. He recognized that he was only an instrument. Pharaoh then recounts his dreams, fat cows being devoured by thin cows, full ears of grain being consumed by dry ones. Joseph explains with simplicity and firmness that God was revealing the future. There would be 7 years of great abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. But Joseph does not only interpret, he also presents a plan. He suggests storing food during the good years to face the difficult time ahead. His trust in God walked hand in hand with wisdom and responsibility. Pharaoh's decision is immediate. Joseph is appointed governor of Egypt, becoming the second most powerful man in the kingdom. He receives authority over the storehouses, the resources, and the main decisions of the nation. Yet there is an essential point. Joseph does not receive his own territory. He does not build a personal kingdom, nor establish dominion over a specific land. His mission was not to possess, but to manage and protect. During the years of abundance, he carefully organizes everything and stores food. When the famine arrives, it affects not only Egypt, but other regions as well. Peoples from various nations begin to depend on Joseph's administration. His influence goes far beyond a single territory. He does not govern merely one land, he preserves lives. At that moment, it becomes evident that God was using Joseph on a scale much greater than he could have imagined. It is within this context that the promise made to Abraham begins to be fulfilled in a quiet yet powerful way. God had said that through his descendants, all nations would be blessed. Genesis 12, verse 3. Joseph becomes a direct part of that fulfillment. Through him, many lives are saved, nations receive food, and the very family that would give rise to Israel survives in the midst of a great crisis. When Joseph's brothers go down to Egypt to buy food, the situation changes completely. Those who had sold him now depend on him to remain alive. Genesis 42. Even though he has the power to take revenge, Joseph does not choose that path. He does not humiliate them, nor does he try to repay the evil he suffered. On the contrary, he understands that everything was part of something greater. He himself declares that God sent him ahead of them to preserve lives. Genesis 45, verse 5. Joseph no longer sees his story merely as suffering, but as part of God's plan. At this point, something important becomes clear. Joseph did not receive a tribe because his mission was not connected to conquering or dividing land. His calling was to ensure that there would be a living people to occupy that land in the future. He did not form a tribe bearing his own name, but he helped preserve them all. His inheritance was not measured by territory, but by protected lives and fulfilled promises. The decisive moment comes in the final days of Jacob. Already elderly and living in Egypt, he realizes that his end is near and calls Joseph for a meeting that would change the history of the tribes of Israel. Joseph brings with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, born in Egypt. Until that moment, they were only grandsons of Jacob and naturally would not have had the right to a direct inheritance among the sons of the patriarch. What happens in that meeting goes far beyond a simple farewell. Moved by spiritual direction, Jacob makes an unexpected decision. He looks at Joseph's sons and declares, "Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are." Genesis 48, verse 5. With this statement, Jacob is not merely giving a blessing. He is officially adopting his grandsons as sons, placing them on the same level as the other sons he himself had fathered. This action completely changes the way the inheritance would be divided in Israel. Normally, each son would receive a portion of the land. Joseph, being one of the 12, would have been entitled to only one share, but Jacob does something different. Instead of giving that portion directly to Joseph, he distributes it to his 2 sons. In practice, this means that Joseph receives 2 portions. It is as if he is granted a double inheritance, something connected to the right of the firstborn. The moment of blessing carries even deeper meaning. Manasseh was the older son, and according to tradition, should have received the primary blessing. However, Jacob crosses his hands and places his right hand on Ephraim the younger, Genesis 48 verses 13 and 14. Joseph tries to correct his father, thinking he has made a mistake because of his age. But Jacob explains that he knows exactly what he is doing. He declares that both would become great. Yet Ephraim would be greater and would become a great nation. Here something essential becomes clear. Joseph did not lose his inheritance. On the contrary, it was expanded. While each brother gave rise to one tribe, Joseph came to be represented by 2, Ephraim and Manasseh. His name does not appear as a single tribe in the division of the land because his portion was multiplied. Where the others received 1 share, Joseph received 2. This helps explain why, when the tribes of Israel are mentioned, the name Joseph seems not to appear in the list. In reality, he is present in an even more significant way. Ephraim and Manasseh were not small or insignificant tribes. On the contrary, they played important roles in the history of the people. Ephraim in many moments even comes to represent the northern kingdom in the biblical texts. In other words, Joseph's influence did not diminish over time. It grew. Jacob's decision is also connected to everything Joseph had experienced before. He had been separated from his family, spent years away from the promised land, and endured great suffering. Yet none of it was wasted. What seemed like loss was part of God's plan. What seemed like distance was actually preparation. Joseph did not personally conquer territory in Canaan, but his sons would occupy 2 important regions in the Promised Land. Jacob concludes this moment by reminding Joseph that God had been with him throughout his journey, and by affirming that the Lord would bring the people back to the Promised Land, Genesis 48, verse 21. This word was not only about that moment, but pointed toward the future. Even though Joseph lived and died in Egypt, his descendants would be firmly established in the land of promise. Thus, it becomes clear that Joseph was not left without a tribe. He was represented twice. His name does not stand alone because his inheritance was multiplied through his sons. The absence of the phrase tribe of Joseph is not an omission, but a sign of a blessing greater than the common pattern. When the people of Israel finally cross the Jordan River and enter the Promised Land, the long-awaited moment arrives, the division of the land. Under the leadership of Joshua, each tribe begins to receive the portion that God had promised since the time of Abraham. It was the fulfillment of an ancient promise. Each group would now have its territory and its permanent place in Canaan. Ephraim and Manasseh do not appear as something unusual or added later. They participate in this division as legitimate tribes with the same rights as the others, and they do not receive small portions. Manasseh, for example, receives land on both sides of the Jordan, something uncommon and significant. Ephraim receives a central, fertile region of great influence, which would later play an important role in Israel's history. This was not coincidence. It was the fulfillment of the blessing Jacob had declared many years earlier. At that moment, it becomes evident that Joseph was not excluded from the inheritance. On the contrary, he was honored in a special way. Instead of a single portion, his family received 2. Instead of a territory bearing his own name, his legacy spread through his sons. What was known as the double portion of the firstborn is clearly fulfilled here. Even though he was not the first son of Jacob, Joseph received this privilege through the blessing recorded in Genesis 48, and the division carried out by Joshua only confirmed what God had already established. The fact that there is no tribe of Joseph is not a flaw or an oversight in the biblical text. It was intentional and full of meaning. Joseph is represented twice. While each of the other sons appears connected to a single tribe, Joseph appears through two, Ephraim and Manasseh. Where the others received one share, he received two. This shows that the way God honors someone does not always follow human logic. Sometimes the name does not appear directly, yet the result is even greater. This detail also reveals something important about how God fulfills his promises. Joseph lived much of his life outside the Promised Land and died in Egypt, far from Canaan. Even so, his inheritance was not cancelled. On the contrary, it was expanded. God demonstrates that the fulfillment of a promise does not depend only on the place where someone is, but on the faithfulness of his word. Joseph did not live in Canaan, but his descendants occupied important areas of that land. Furthermore, over time, the name of Ephraim often comes to represent the entire northern kingdom in many biblical passages. This shows the strength of Joseph's legacy. His influence was not limited to a simple mention in a genealogy, but deeply marked the history of the nation. He did not have a tribe bearing his own name, yet his presence extended across generations. This part of the story teaches that not every absence means loss. What appears to be missing may actually be multiplication. Joseph was not diminished in history, he was expanded within it. His inheritance was not limited to a single territory, but divided into two, strengthening his legacy even more. Thus, when we look at the division of the land, we understand that Joseph's name was not erased. It simply manifested in a different and much deeper way. When we look at Joseph's entire journey, we understand something very important. The fact that he did not have a tribe with his own name does not mean loss, forgetfulness, or failure in God's promise. On the contrary, Joseph's purpose was never merely to possess a territory in Israel. From the beginning, God set him apart for something greater than geographical boundaries. While the other sons of Jacob gave rise to tribes connected to the occupation and division of territories, Joseph came to represent care and preservation. He was the instrument God used to sustain lives in a time of crisis. When everything seemed scarce, he ensured provision. When the future seemed threatened, he helped keep the promise alive. His mission was not to mark borders, but to ensure that there would be a living people to occupy them later. Joseph did not have his own territory in Canaan during his lifetime, yet his influence reached the entire nation. Through him, Israel survived the famine. Because of his position in Egypt, Jacob's family was not destroyed before it could grow and become a great people. The Bible shows that God used Joseph to preserve the lineage of the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Without him, there might not even have been tribes to receive the promised land. This teaches something profound. Not every inheritance is tied to a piece of land. Some inheritances are spiritual, others are historical, and last for generations. Joseph did not receive Canaan while he lived, but he occupied an essential place in God's plan. He did not rule a tribe in Israel, yet he managed resources that saved his own people. His legacy is marked not only on maps, but in the survival and continuity of the nation. While many of the tribes of Israel became known for the idea of possessing land, Joseph became known for the sustenance he brought to the people. While many stories highlight battles and conquests, Joseph's journey highlights care and preservation. He shows that there are callings that are not revealed through power or dominion, but through service. There are missions that do not leave visible marks on territory, yet leave deep marks on history. Joseph's life teaches that value is not found only in what is conquered, but in what is protected and kept alive. Joseph also reveals something important about how God works. He does not follow human standards of reward. Sometimes the name does not appear prominently because the influence has already spread in a greater way. Joseph did not have a tribe bearing his own name because he was represented in two. He did not receive an exclusive territory because he was used to sustain them all. His inheritance was not concentrated in a single place. It was multiplied. In the end, Joseph's story shows that God's purpose does not always unfold the way we imagine. The path may involve rejection, distance from family, and long periods of silence, yet all of this can be part of preparation for something greater. Joseph lived and died outside the Promised Land, but he was never outside God's plan. His legacy ensured the survival of a nation and influenced generations. For this reason, the fact that Joseph did not have a tribe bearing his name is not a forgotten detail in the Bible. It is a clear message. God does not measure inheritance only by territory, but by purpose. Joseph fulfilled his mission completely, showing that there are callings that go beyond the place where we are and reach into the future we help preserve.